March 14th, 1942. The hum of machinery filled the cavernous hangar of RAF Plant 12 in Manchester, England. Sparks flew from welding torches, mingling with the acrid scent of heated metal. Outside, the winter wind clawed at the brick walls, rattling loose windowpanes. But inside, hundreds of men and women were a blur of motion, riveting, hammering, and assembling. Among them was Chief Engineer Thomas Whitaker, a lean man with grease-streaked hands and a furrowed brow, who paced along the assembly lines as if he could will the planes into existence by sheer force of will. Whitaker surveyed the chaos with sharp, calculating eyes. The government had demanded 50 new bombers each month, an impossible target under conventional methods. Factories across Britain were struggling, supply chains were erratic, and skilled labor was stretched thin. But Whitaker had an idea, born not in a lecture hall, but in the grinding reality of scrap yards and discarded parts. He believed that modular construction, a method borrowed from shipbuilding, could turn piles of scrap into operational bombers in record time. He knelt beside a half-assembled fuselage, its skeletal frame exposed. "If we pre-assemble the wings as separate units," he explained to his assistant, a young engineer named Peter Hargrove, "we can bolt them on in a day instead of a week." Peter nodded, scribbling calculations on a grease-stained notebook. Around them, dozens of workers lifted engine blocks, threaded bolts, and tightened rivets, each movement choreographed like an intricate dance. Whitaker moved swiftly between teams, adjusting blueprints taped to walls, swapping out inefficient jigs, and demonstrating new techniques that allowed 2 men to do the work that previously required 5. By mid-morning, the first prototype of the modular bomber took shape. Its aluminum skin gleamed under the harsh overhead lights, and the roar of the newly installed engines echoed like a distant thunderstorm. Whitaker climbed onto a nearby scaffolding to inspect the tail assembly. "Every piece has to fit perfectly," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the clanging of metal. "One misalignment, one crooked rivet, and the bomber is useless in combat." The ingenuity wasn't just in the assembly method, it was also in the materials. Scarce parts from scrapped aircraft were reconditioned, wings were reinforced, engines overhauled, and landing gear scavenged from planes that had been written off. Every inch of scrap metal was accounted for. Whitaker's team developed a rotating schedule where mechanics, electricians, and welders moved fluidly from one station to another, ensuring that no time was wasted. By sunset, the first of the 50-month quota had begun to take shape. Whitaker wiped his brow and stepped back, surveying the lines of aircraft in varying stages of assembly. The hangar, once chaotic, now hummed with coordinated precision. In the corner, Peter Hargrove glanced at Whitaker and said, "Do you really think we can do this?" Whitaker's eyes scanned the growing fleet, the glint of determination hardening his features. "We don't have a choice," he replied. "Every bomber we put in the sky could turn the tide of the war." The night shift began as darkness fell over Manchester, the glow of welding torches casting long shadows on the concrete floors. The clamour of hammers and drills became a symphony of industrial ingenuity, punctuated by the occasional spark that hissed as it met the metal. Whitaker watched, calculating, adjusting, directing. He was no longer just an engineer. He was the heartbeat of Plant 12, and in the next few months his ideas would ripple through Britain's war effort in ways no one could have predicted. April 2nd, 1942. The first light of dawn barely pierced the fog that clung to Manchester, yet inside RAF Plant 12, the factory roared to life. Whitaker strode down the assembly line, clipboard in hand, inspecting progress with the meticulous eye of a surgeon. The modular system was working. Wings were arriving fully assembled, fuselage sections were pre-fitted, and engines were being installed in record time. Teams no longer wasted hours aligning every part individually. Components were designed to snap together like puzzle pieces, allowing for rapid assembly without sacrificing precision. In one corner, a group of women, part of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force, lifted a freshly welded tail section onto a fuselage. Their synchronized movements were seamless, the culmination of weeks of training orchestrated by Whitaker himself. Nearby, Mechanics tested engines with a deafening roar that shook the hangar walls, while electricians ran wiring harnesses that had been pre-bundled and labeled, reducing errors that once plagued production. Each worker moved with purpose, aware that every bolt tightened brought Britain one step closer to air superiority. Whitaker's assistant, Peter Hargrove, ran the timing charts. "If we keep this pace, we'll have 20 bombers ready by the end of the month," he said, eyes wide as he surveyed the bustling floor. Whitaker nodded, but his mind was already racing ahead. "We'll double that. I've reconfigured the wing jig and ordered the engines in batches. By next week, 50 is within reach." But speed came at a cost. Fatigue hung over the workforce like a storm cloud. The clang of hammers and whine of drills never ceased. One misstep could spell disaster. An improperly secured wing or a misfitted engine could send a bomber tumbling during its first sortie. Whitaker walked among his teams, offering guidance, correcting errors, and when necessary, stepping in to demonstrate proper technique himself. His leadership was relentless, but it inspired loyalty. Every man and woman in the hangar understood the stakes. The Luftwaffe was relentless, and Britain's bomber command depended on the output of this single plant. By mid-month, the first fully assembled bombers rolled out onto the tarmac. Soldiers and engineers alike watched as these gleaming machines, born from scrap and ingenuity, were fueled and readied for test flights. Whitaker and Hargrove stood side by side, helmets clutched tightly in their hands as the first bomber's engines roared to life. The vibrations rattled through the hangar, and the plane, lifted by sheer thrust, taxied down the runway. Whitaker's heart pounded. Every detail he had labored over was being tested in real time. The bomber lifted into the grey sky, wings cutting through the clouds with an elegance that belied its hasty assembly. Cheers erupted from the ground crew, but Whitaker's gaze was fixed on the flight path. This was only the beginning. Each bomber completed meant more missions flown over enemy territory, more lives protected, and more ground gained in the brutal air war over Europe. By the end of April, Plant 12 had not only met its quota, but exceeded it. 50 bombers had emerged from the factory in record time, each one a testament to Whitaker's vision and the tireless dedication of his team. The modular method spread quickly to other RAF plants, revolutionizing production across Britain. What had begun as a desperate experiment in efficiency had become a cornerstone of the Allied war effort, and for Whitaker, there was no time to celebrate. Enemy fighters would not wait, and every bomber in the sky could be the difference between victory and defeat. May 5th, 1942. The sun barely peeked over the horizon, casting a pale orange glow across the sprawling tarmac of RAF Plant 12. The 50 bombers that had rolled off the assembly lines were lined up like soldiers at attention, their silver fuselages glinting in the morning light. Whitaker, wearing his leather flight jacket despite rarely leaving the hangar floor, watched as test pilots climbed into the cockpits. Among them was Flight Lieutenant James Harrington, a veteran of countless bombing raids over France, who ran his gloved hands over the instrument panel, checking every gauge with practiced precision. "Engine checks complete," Harrington radioed. His voice crackled through the hangar's loudspeakers. Whitaker leaned closer to the microphone, listening intently. The engines roared to life in unison, a deep, resonant growl that vibrated through the concrete beneath their feet. Every plane taxied toward the runway, propellers slicing through the cool morning air. Whitaker's stomach tightened. Months of design, sweat, and ingenuity were about to be tested in the unforgiving theater of the sky. The first bomber lifted gracefully, its wings catching the wind perfectly. Harrington executed a tight turn, banking low over the fields surrounding Manchester. Whitaker's eyes tracked the plane, noting every wobble, every flicker of the engines. Modular construction had allowed speed in assembly, but now came the ultimate test: endurance and combat readiness. As more bombers took flight, problems emerged, minor at first. One engine hummed irregularly. A landing gear strut required adjustment. The hydraulics in a wing responded sluggishly. Whitaker signaled to his ground crew, directing teams to make rapid adjustments. "Tighten the bolts on the starboard wing," he barked. "We can't afford even a single failure during a mission." The hum of activity on the ground was relentless, a mirror of the chaos he had orchestrated in the hangar weeks before. By late afternoon, all 50 bombers had completed their test flights. Each returned safely, carrying the satisfaction of successful missions and the marks of lessons learned. Whitaker debriefed the pilots, noting which modifications were needed to improve stability, engine efficiency, and fuselage integrity. Flight Lieutenant Harrington approached him, a grin breaking across his soot-streaked face. "Never thought I'd see 50 bombers built this fast, and all of them actually fly," he said. Whitaker allowed himself a brief smile but shook his head. "Flying is just the start, James. The real test is the skies over occupied Europe." With test flights complete, Plant 12's production team turned their attention to scaling operations. Whitaker introduced staggered shifts, night assembly crews, and expanded prefabrication of modular components. Scrap yards were combed for reusable parts, and the factory's logistics were tightened to ensure engines, wings, and fuselage sections arrived just in time, never stalling the assembly line. Each improvement shaved hours, sometimes days, off the construction timeline. By June, Plant 12 had transformed from a single factory into a hive of continuous production, churning out bombers faster than anyone in Britain had imagined possible. The once daunting goal of 50 bombers a month had become routine, a testament not just to Whitaker's engineering genius, but to the resilience and skill of every man and woman who labored under the humming lights and acrid smoke. And while the pilots would take the planes into combat, it was here, amid the clang of metal, the hiss of welding torches, and the sweat-streaked faces of factory workers, that Britain's future in the air was being forged. July 17th, 1942. Over the rolling fields of northern France, a squadron of bombers sliced through low-hanging clouds. Pilots gripped their controls, eyes scanning the horizon for flak bursts or the sudden glare of Messerschmitt fighters. Among them was Flight Lieutenant James Harrington, now intimately familiar with the new modular bombers. He marveled at how stable and responsive the aircraft felt, a stark contrast to the older models he had flown. These planes, born from scrap metal and Whitaker's revolutionary assembly line, were more than machines. They were instruments of survival and strategy. Back in Manchester, Whitaker paced the hangar floor, tracking mission reports as they arrived via telegraph. Each bomber returning intact was a testament to the precision and innovation of his team. But every day brought new pressure. Enemy anti-aircraft defenses grew deadlier, and every lost bomber meant lives and missions compromised. Whitaker's modular production wasn't just about speed. It was about resilience. The ability to repair and replace parts quickly allowed damaged bombers to return to service faster than ever before, keeping Britain's bomber fleet operational despite heavy losses. On the front lines, pilots found themselves increasingly confident in the bomber's capabilities. Wing Commander Harold Bennett led a raid over the industrial heart of Germany, the planes flying in tight formation, engines droning a mechanical symphony. "Hold steady, lads," Bennett radioed, the voice calm but urgent. Bomb bays opened, releasing payloads with deadly precision. Despite intense anti-aircraft fire, every modular bomber returned home. Whitaker received the message with quiet satisfaction. The ingenuity of Plant 12 was saving lives and striking crucial blows against the enemy. Meanwhile, in the hangars, the factory had evolved into a battlefield of its own. Teams worked around the clock, rotating shifts to maintain production while integrating feedback from combat missions. Minor design tweaks became standard procedures. Reinforced fuselage joints, improved hydraulics, and optimized engine mounts. Whitaker and his engineers held nightly briefings, discussing data from returned aircraft, pilot testimonials, and enemy engagement reports. Every scrap piece of metal, every rivet, every bolt had a purpose, and the outcome of the war depended on it. By late summer, the results were undeniable. Plant 12's modular bombers had not only met, but exceeded operational demands. 50 planes a month became the norm, their rapid deployment ensuring that RAF bombing campaigns maintained relentless pressure on Axis targets. Whitaker walked the assembly lines, observing new apprentices learning the techniques that had transformed British aviation. He knew that the work here, in the sweat and clang of the factory, had become as crucial as any battle in the sky. As dusk fell over Manchester, the roar of returning bombers echoed faintly in the distance. Whitaker paused, listening, letting the sound of engines and propellers settle in his chest like a heartbeat. These planes, forged from ingenuity and determination, were more than machines. They were symbols of Britain's resolve. And in every completed bomber, every mission flown, the nation's hope for victory soared higher. August 30th, 1942. Manchester's streets were quiet, the distant rumble of returning bombers, a steady reminder of the war waged far beyond the city. Inside Plant 12, however, the hangar was a storm of activity, brighter and louder than ever before. Whitaker moved through the assembly lines, noting how even the newest recruits handled the modular system with skill that rivaled seasoned engineers. What had begun as an experimental idea had become a finely tuned machine, a factory that ran like clockwork. The real triumph was not just in speed, but in resilience. When a raid returned a bomber riddled with flak damage, its components could be disassembled, repaired, and reassembled in days rather than weeks. This adaptability ensured that Britain never suffered a shortage of operational bombers, even in the face of intense Luftwaffe attacks. Whitaker's innovative techniques had effectively turned scrap into a lifeline, each plane a blend of engineering precision and human dedication. Whitaker took a rare moment to step outside. The cool night, air heavy, with the scent of oil and rain-soaked concrete. He thought of the pilots who relied on these machines to carry them safely over enemy territory, the women and men who worked long hours to meet impossible quotas, and the countless small innovations that had added up to something extraordinary. He realized that the success of the bombers was as much about human ingenuity and teamwork as it was about design and assembly. Across Britain, news of the modular bomber system spread quickly. Other RAF plants began implementing Whitaker's methods, and the pace of production accelerated nationwide. The 50-bomber goal, once considered unattainable, was now achievable and exceeded month after month. The ingenuity that had begun with a single engineer in a Manchester hangar was now a critical pillar in Britain's war strategy, helping maintain air superiority during key bombing campaigns and ensuring that every mission had the tools to succeed. Whitaker stood atop a scaffolding one final time, overlooking the completed bombers lined up like sentinels. Engines were tested, panels polished, and crews prepared for the next sortie. In that moment, the clamor of the hangar faded into the background. He understood that these planes, assembled from discarded scraps and powered by relentless determination, carried more than bombs. They carried Britain's hope, its resilience, and its unwavering resolve to fight on. As the lights of Plant 12 dimmed and the workers finally headed home, the silver silhouettes of the bombers gleamed under the night sky, ready to rise at dawn. Every rivet, every bolt, every welded seam was a testament to what ingenuity, courage, and perseverance could achieve. Whitaker's legacy, etched into the fuselage of 50 aircraft each month, would endure long after the war had ended, proof that even in the darkest hours, innovation could turn scrap into salvation.